Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Benjamin Franklin said, believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. So on this Christmas day, I'd like to discuss the difference between perspective and principle. Principles. What's the difference? Perspective means to see from one angle of vision. Principles means to see from all angles of vision. For example, in any sport, there's something called boundaries. So what are boundaries? Inside of bounds and outside of bounds. So for example, let's say a team, let's say a basketball team. Let's say the player on team A steps on the line. And the referee says, you were out of bounds. But then the player says, no, from my perspective, I was inside the bounds. So in every sport, they have something called the replay. So what's the replay? The replay is where both the referee and the player or teams can look at the replay of the cameras. Why? Because people only have one angle of vision, whereas the cameras have all angles of vision. In much the same way as conditioned souls, we have our perspective. In our perspective, what does that mean? One angle of vision, whereas God, the angels, the demigods, the elevated beings, they have all angles of vision. So actually, the conclusion is that we could get ourselves in a lot of trouble from only seeing from one angle of vision. So actually, the birth of Jesus starts off with a similar lesson related to this subject matter. So once upon a time, in a mystical land known as Bethlehem, there lived a beautiful lady named Mary. Mary was married to a man named Joseph. So one day while Mary was by herself, an angel appeared to her from the sky. So when this angel approached her, the angel says, my dear Mary, you will be blessed by Almighty God with a divine child, the Messiah. And so therefore Mary is known as the Virgin Mary. Why? Because the Holy Spirit would impregnate her. And so you would think she would feel very blessed. No doubt she was. But unfortunately, the angel failed to tell Mary's husband, Joseph. So one day, after this incident, Mary went to her husband. She says, my dear Joseph, an angel appears to me. Now I'm pregnant and I didn't do anything wrong. So Joseph was like, let me get this straight. So an angel appeared to you, you're pregnant, and you didn't do anything wrong. Well, I'm going to go find me an angel and leave you. It's actually described that Joseph, obviously, who will believe this story, this this fantasy, this make-believe story? At least that's how we would see it. This is precisely what Joseph saw. So he did not believe Mary, and so he was going to actually leave her and be about his way. But an angel appeared to Joseph that night in his dreams, and they told Joseph, my dear Joseph, Mary is telling the truth. She has been impregnated with the divine child by the Holy Spirit. Do not leave her. This child will be able to deliver people from their sins. And so in this way, when Joseph woke up from his dream, he apologized to Mary. He says, my dear Mary, please forgive me for not believing you. So the lesson we could take from this is jumping to conclusions. The reason Joseph did not believe Mary is because he only saw from one angle of vision. He had his perspective. Whereas the angels, they have all angles of vision. So this is a lesson in life we could get ourselves by jumping to conclusions or speculation by not giving others the benefit of the doubt. So there's a nice saying. It says, just as criminals who escape from prison will cause problems for all of human society, so when our bad qualities escape from us through our words and our actions, they cause problems for us and potentially for others. How does the government subdue criminals? With security guards. So it's described that a wise person subdues pride with humility, envy with appreciation, vengeance with forgiveness, and speculation with education. So speculation means to see from one angle of vision. Education means to see from all angles of vision, how to give others the benefit of the doubt. So that's one lesson we can take from the birth of Jesus with his parents. So when Jesus was born, there are many parables, many pastimes, but we'll try to review a few of them. So in this regard, here's one of them. There's a nice quote that says, I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. This is by Maya Angelou. And so this is very important because one day a man went to. Now, this quote can be applied positively or negatively depending on our circumstances with others. So one day a man went up to Jesus and he says, my dear Jesus, who is my neighbor? So in order to answer this question, Jesus told him a parable or a short story. So Jesus says, one day there was a Jewish traveler. He was traveling on the side of the road. And then, unfortunately, some dacoits, some criminals approached him. They stripped him of his clothes. They took him of all of it, stole all his money, and physically beat him up and threw him in a ditch. And so, this Jewish man traveler, he was thinking, wow, I'm doomed unless somebody helped me. But it's very interesting that when the Jewish man grew up, it's described that he was taught by his family that all Jewish people are your friends. And the Samaritans, apparently there was a group of people called Samaritans. Of course, I'm not a historian, but we can understand that what they call countries today, they didn't call them, they had their own names of countries back then. So apparently there was a group of people called the Samaritans, and apparently the Samaritans were considered the enemies of Jews. So this Jewish man who was stuck in this ditch was brought up that all Samaritans are bad. And so in this way, while the Jewish man was stuck in a ditch, he was thinking, wow, I'm completely helpless. Who will save me? So then another Jewish man was approached him. So this man in the ditch, he was thinking, wow, my brother, another Jewish person, I'm saved. But then when he noticed that this man who he thought would save him looked at him and then kept walking as if nothing had happened. So he was thinking, how is this possible? A person of my own religion completely neglected me. And so in this way, another man walked by, a man from his same culture. And so he was also thinking, I'm saved. But then this man did the same thing. He walked by him as if nothing had happened. So there was a third man who approached this Jewish man in the ditch, and it happened to be a Samaritan. Or what this Jewish man was taught that these are our enemies from birth. He was taught that the Samaritans are our enemies. So when he saw this Samaritan approach, he was like, oh no, I'm doomed. He's gonna finish me off. But then something interesting happened. The Samaritan, had a lot of compassion. He was like, who is this man? I don't care what nationality, creed, color, or class he's in. I could see that somebody needs help. So in this way, the Samaritan got off his horseback. He approached this Jewish man. He patched him up, took care of him, put him on a horse, and took him to a hospital. And so in this way, this Jewish man, it changed his perspective completely. That there's a difference between uniform and unity. Uniform means that we live in harmony with others on the outside. Unity means we live in harmony with others on the inside. So in this way, the man can understand that just because people are part of my culture, my religion, that's uniform does not mean unity. So in this way, when Jesus told this parable, so he asked this man who asked him the question, who is my neighbor? So Jesus says, who do you think the neighbor, the true neighbor was? The person inside this man's religion or outside his religion? And so the answer was obvious. So this is one parable by Jesus to teach us a particular lesson. So there's another one. There's a nice quote. It says, in this regard, it says, happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within our control and some things are not. It is only after you have faced up to this fundamental rule and learned to distinguish between what you can and can't control, then inner tranquility and outer effectiveness become possible. So this particular story regarding Jesus has to do with the difference between one's environment and one's enlightenment. So what's the difference between environment and enlightenment? Environment means things outside our control. Enlightenment means things inside our control. For example, since it's the Christmas season, what's outside our control? The weather, right? So if somebody is stuck outside in the winter cold, what's going to happen? They will physically die unless they take shelter inside of a building. In much the same way, if we don't take shelter in our good qualities, like the building blocks, these humility, tolerance, forgiveness, then when circumstances, when persons, places, things, and circumstances are cold-blooded, then we'll spiritually die. So one day Jesus was walking with his 12 disciples or apostles. And so one of his disciples named Peter, he says, when Jesus was experiencing a lot of adversity, a lot of obstacles, in much the same way we also go through adversity, obstacles in our life. So one day, one of Jesus's disciples named Peter says, "My dear Jesus, if you are going to be crucified, I will die alongside with you." So then Jesus says something interesting to Peter. He says, "Peter, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." So what does this mean? So it's described that some materialistic priests, they brought Jesus to their temple for judgment. And so Peter and all of Jesus' disciples, they were outside. And so one woman looked at Peter and she recognized him. She says, Aren't you a disciple of Jesus? Didn't I see you with Jesus?" And so Peter says, "No, I do not even know Jesus. I don't know what you're talking about." So then another person says, "Yes, I believe you are the disciple of Jesus." And so Peter says, "No, I do not know what you're talking about. I never met the man." And then finally another person says, "Just by your accent, I could tell that you were from this region where Jesus was." Just like, for example, if you don't know the particular race or culture of somebody, all you have to do is hear their accent, right? If they're from London, it doesn't matter if they're African American, white, Asian. If they have a British accent, "Would you like a cup of tea?" Then you can know what region they're from. In much the same way, this person says, "No, Peter, I could tell your accent that you know Jesus." So Peter was like, "I do not know Jesus." And so in this way, Peter heard a rooster crow, and then it reminded him what Jesus says. Jesus says, "You will deny me 3 times when the rooster crows." So now, why did Jesus predict this? Because it's very simple. In life, nobody's perfect. Now, we're not on the status of Jesus because sometimes we have a good nature and we have a bad nature. What does that mean? That means sometimes we're like Jesus, and sometimes our good nature, and sometimes we're like Peter. So what does that mean? So, but from Jesus' perspective, why did he predict, "My dear Peter, you will deny me 3 times"? Why? Because in life, we expect a good architect, he builds the building because he expects the weather to go bad. In much the same way, when we expect things to not always go our way, that means we're more inclined to build character. Just like when a winter comes, we're completely undisturbed because we built the shelter. In much the same way, Jesus, he was just undisturbed by all these adversities because he expected them. So in life, there's a saying, peace begins when expectation ends. When we don't always expect things to go our way, just like nobody foolishly expects the weather to be perfect all the time. So when we don't expect everything to go our way, that means we could tolerate and we could forgive when things, people, circumstances do not always treat us like we want them. And not only that, we can be humble because in the final analysis, there's a famous saying where Jesus, without going into the details of the pastime, Jesus says, "He was free of sin, let him be the first to cast a stone." So in much the same way, whatever we criticize others for, we've probably done it ourselves. And there's so many pastimes like that in the Bible and all universal spiritual teachings where we can forgive others, because whatever we criticize others for, than we've probably done ourselves. So, but that's one lesson we could take. The final lesson we could take is a very similar lesson, but there's a nice quote related to this lesson. It says, "A bird sitting in a tree is not afraid of the branch breaking because her trust is not in the branch, but in her own wings." So, what does that branch represent? It represents the support we receive from others. And what does the wings represent? It represents our faith in God and our faith in our practice of our good qualities like humility, tolerance, forgiveness, etc. Faith. And so there was an incident in the Bible described as the Last Supper. So what is the Last Supper? The Last Supper is the last meal Jesus was supposed to take before he was supposed to be crucified. So at the Last Supper, where all of Jesus' disciples were present, it's a similar incident with Peter. So Jesus, when he approached the supper table, the dinner table, before they began to consume the food, he looked at all of his disciples and he says, "One of you will betray me." And then Jesus went about his business as if nothing had happened. Now, if we were given information that somebody was going to betray us, we will be living in fear, right? Who's going to betray me? Who? And we'll interrogate every person. But Jesus did not do that. He just says, "One of you will betray me." So what is the lesson? The lesson is that in life, people are like that branch on a tree, right? They give us support. But sometimes that support is taken away, either for superficial reasons, or you could say just circumstantial reasons. People move away, right? People move away. People get another job, or superficial reasons where people betray us because, very superficial reasons. But the lesson is, or time in the final analysis, our relationships cannot last forever. But we see that if a branch breaks, a bird is not disturbed by it. Why? Because the bird flies with her own wings. In much the same way, why was Jesus undisturbed when he understood that one of his disciples would betray him? And how could Jesus forgive even when he was crucified? Because his happiness wasn't dependent on being supported by others. Now, there's a balance in life. So there's a balance in life that branch represents people and that tree represents institutions. Sometimes people betray us. Sometimes whole spiritual institutions betray us. But nevertheless, just like a branch could break, but also an axeman could cut down a tree. That tree represents the institution. But the bird is completely undisturbed. Why? Because not only can she use her own wings, but the reality is that there are so many trees around, so many branches, trees available. In much the same way, we should not become disturbed when persons, places, things, and circumstances are taken away from us. Why? Because we have our own wings. That means our own good qualities we have to practice. And also we could be grateful for also the many people and circumstances that Krishna puts in our life, that God puts in our life. Alternatively, when these things are taken away. So Jesus, the disciple that was going to betray Jesus, his name was Judas. So Judas went up to Jesus' crucifiers, and Judas asked him, "What will you give me if I turn Jesus over to you?" And so Jesus' crucifiers, they gave Judas, I believe, 10 pieces of silver, money. So there's a saying, men make counterfeit money, in many more cases, money makes counterfeit men. So in this way, Judas was counterfeit. But Jesus was completely undisturbed, like I said. But the interesting thing about both Peter and Judas, they felt completely guilty for betraying Jesus. So the lesson in life is that if we don't try our best to live up to our highest character, then the guilt will eat us alive. So it's actually described that Judas, he actually committed suicide. Peter, he just felt guilty. So this is a lesson in life that when the going gets rough and the rough gets going, I believe that's the same. But if we don't live up to our highest integrity, then definitely, no doubt about it, the lesson we could take is that guilt will eat us alive. But no problem, because the reality is that, like Jesus says, he was free of sin, let him be the first to cast a stone. So the last lesson I would like to say is that when we all commit mistakes in life, no problem. We should not beat ourselves up about our mistakes, nor should we allow anybody else to beat us up about it or make us feel completely guilty. So the last analogy is that it says the reason a rear view mirror is smaller than the windshield on your car is because what's in your past is not as nearly as important as what's in your future. So that's a very nice quote because, for example, suppose you're driving your car and you're completely absorbed in your rear view mirror. What's going to happen? You're going to get in a car accident. In much the same way, when we're always absorbed in our past mistakes, then we cannot spiritually move forward in life. So we can see this, what happened with Judas, what happened with Peter, because they were so absorbed in their mistakes that they could not properly move forward in life. But we all made mistakes. We're not Jesus. So we all made mistakes. So we can all relate more to Judas and Peter than Jesus. So, but not only that, there's a nice other lesson that if we're absorbed in our own mistakes, just like if you're absorbed in your rearview mirror, you're going to get in a car accident. Same thing. If you're absorbed in somebody else's rearview mirror, you're also going to get in a car accident. So what does that mean? If we're absorbed in our own mistakes, we cannot move forward in life. Same thing, if we're also absorbed in other people's mistakes, then we cannot move forward in life. But the purpose of a rearview mirror, what's the purpose of a rearview mirror? Is so you can learn how to respect and navigate with the other drivers, right? So why do we look at our past faults? Why? To keep us humble. But this does not mean you should be absorbed in your faults. You glance at them to keep you humble, just like when you're driving on the road. If you have no rearview mirror, how will you respect the other drivers? You're going to clash with each other, right? So in much the same way, the purpose of a rearview mirror is to glance at your, to respect other drivers. So in much the same way, why do we look at our faults sometimes? So we can respect others. That, oh, why I'm going to criticize others? I have so many faults. So this is a lesson, a Christmas lesson. Hopefully it's a great, sobering, but also enlivening lesson we could take on this Christmas day. So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.